Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Mandel, and welcome to the Not Podcast podcast. I am here today with Topher Stephenson, and Topher is the co-founder of CRE AI Studio. And I will hand it over to Topher to give us a bit of an introduction on him and what he's all about, and then we will dig in.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me today, Michael. Really appreciate it and excited to be here chatting with you. And like you said, I'm the co-founder of CRE AI Studio. I started it with my partners, Jonathan Buckaloo and Nadine Ezzi. And essentially, it's an online learning platform for commercial real estate professionals who want to learn how to leverage some of these incredible AI tools in their day-to-day business. And so prior to that, I worked in commercial real estate for a little over 11 years. I started out on the in-house property marketing direction side of things, worked with a group that just owned different types of commercial properties all over the country, different markets, different asset classes. And my job was to get those properties out in front of people and try to make the phone ring. And eventually the phone was ringing a lot, and so they brought me in to work on the deals with them. And so I did it more so in-house property marketing direction, but also in-house deal making for the better part of 3 years. And then I shifted gears and started applying technology to systematizing, operationalizing, and trying to position commercial real estate brokerage companies for growth. And so I did that for about the last 5 years or so. And so now I'm excited to be taking everything that I've learned about applying technology to solving commercial real estate problems and helping other folks in the commercial real estate industry do the same.
Awesome. And you just went out on your own in this regard. So why was now the right time for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always loved, working for commercial real estate firms. I've loved being on the in-house ownership side. I loved working in the brokerage side of things as well. But it just feels like we've reached such a critical point where there are so many different types of tools and technologies available that can help commercial real estate professionals in so many different ways. And we've also reached a point where, there's a great awareness of this technology and a hunger that people really want to learn how to use it in their day-to-day work, but just not enough resources for doing that. And so over the past 2.5 years, I've been going around the country doing different panels, doing presentations, doing in-house trainings, on some of these tools that you can use and, specific ways that you can put them to work. And people would always ask me at the end, hey, how can I learn more? We need some increased direction on how to actually do this. And the unfortunate answer was, I'd love to help you, but I just don't have enough time. So eventually I combined forces with Jonathan and Nadine, and we all started working on it together. And shortly thereafter, just realized that, there is a need, and, it's something that I think I can really help with. And it's just something that I want to spend all my time doing. And so that brings us up to now.
So to give a little bit of context on this conversation, Topher and I met at the CREI conference, and one thing that I really took away and enjoyed from that conference was Topher's presentation, where he dug into some very practical applications of AI that that can be used by real estate professionals on a day-to-day basis, and actually showcase some of those. And so I would love for you to bring some of that, to our audience today and talk a little bit about, you know, very hands-on practical applications you've seen that have worked, some of your favorite things to do from a CRE perspective. And let's look at it from a brokerage or brokerage firm perspective to start. Maybe you can give some examples of some of the things you've done and what you've seen be successful, in that on that side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd certainly start by saying that to some extent, it is a little all over the map because the way that brokers and brokerages operate, for whatever reason, even though it's not that giant of an industry and it seems like, it's a pretty simple business, the way that individual brokers and different companies, depending on the resources that they have, operate and, what is kind of a drag on their time really does kind of seem to be all over the map, be it if you specialize in tenant rep, or you do a lot more on the acquisition side working for specific buyers, or you have a lot of listings, you're trying to find people to fill those listings. The things that people seem to find success with really is kind of dictated by, hey, what do you specialize in, what do you spend most of your time doing, and what is sucking up most of that time. But a lot of what we're seeing, especially now that we've launched the studio and we're getting real time feedback from hundreds of people on what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and what's actually working for them, usually falls into one of the buckets of deal sourcing, using AI to do a lot of research very, very quickly, scouring through public information and trying to find actual opportunities for deals. Then you have just kind of the general, market research side of things. Hey, maybe I'm looking at expanding into a new market, or I have a tenant or a client that's expanding into a new market. I need to get a bunch of information very, very quickly and synthesize all of that information very quickly so that I can advise them on that market, or so that I can at least, find them a referral partner in that market and be able to talk with that referral partner intelligently about what's going on in the area. Then you have the actual outreach component of things, and again, this kind of varies depending on what kind of outreach are you doing. Are you reaching out to property ownership groups? Can be kind of complicated and cumbersome to find those people's contact information. Then you have people on more of the tenant rep side that are reaching out to, business owners or business CEOs or
Hmm.
decision makers. And there's a combination of, different tools that you could use to actually, I don't want to say fully automate that outreach, because fully automating the outreach doesn't seem to work all that well, but at least give you a running start to some of that outreach. So eventually, you get in touch with some people, you have an opportunity to get a room with some of the people, and you actually have to pitch them on the business. And so one of the most successful ways, that we're seeing people really leverage AI today in the commercial real estate industry is just with deck creation, and that can mean a lot of different things, again, depending on whether or not you're working at a giant brokerage that has a fleet of people for creating decks, or if you're working at a small individual, regional office and everyone's kind of doing a little bit of everything themselves. There are a lot of people, not just in brokerage, but across commercial real estate, that are, saving, I don't want to say a life-changing amount of time, but a lot of time, just being able to produce decks and visualize information so that they can go into a pitch, and look like they're in the big leagues and get that information and those marketing materials together very, very quickly. Then you have actually analyzing the deals, which can, again, mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but there's a variety of great tools out there that can help with different types of, due diligence and underwriting, negotiation, analyzing legal docs, which my partner Nadine Ezzi, that's really her specialty because she's the attorney in the group. Then you have things like general marketing. Hey, how do I try to leverage AI so that I can improve my social media presence or just get the word out there more about my services or my properties? And then just general productivity. And that's not even very commercial real estate specific, but everyone's drafting their emails with ChatGPT for better or worse. Things like automatically taking meeting notes, putting those meeting notes where they need to go, getting the information from your documents very quickly, putting that information where it needs very quickly, prepping for meetings and looping in people from your team so that they can take action on all of these things that are going on, either in your individual business or in your brokerage's business. So I know that's a lot. And again, it kind of, runs the whole gambit because brokers and brokerages seem to operate very differently. But typically when we find ways that people are really finding success with AI, they tend to fit into one of those specific buckets.
Got it. So the first thing you mentioned was creating decks. What tools do you see people using to create decks? What do you think is the best option for that?
It's come such a long way that I'd say there is no best option. It's hilarious that, 2.5 years ago, people would say, "Hey, Topher, it's great that I can draft some marketing materials using AI, but how do I actually generate marketing deliverables?" And the answer kind of was you couldn't. Maybe you could use Copilot and PowerPoint, put something together, but it's not necessarily going to be best in class. I still gravitate towards one of the ones that came out pretty early in the race. It's called Gamma, and it's just a fantastic platform for, hey, you bring your content or you bring some bullet points, you provide it to Gamma, you tell it kind of the look and feel that you want for the kind of document that you're creating, and it will just start designing and generating and creating AI generated images to go along with your marketing deliverable or your deck right in front of your very eyes. And so there are, some other tools out there that work a little bit better, again, depending on your specific workflow. Maybe when you're creating a deck, you're typically starting from a whole mess of different files and you want to plop that into an AI platform, peel out a bunch of information, and then create the deck based on that information.
Hmm.
Then there's tools like GenSpark is a particularly good tool for that. Manus, I don't know if you've played around with Manus at all, but it's getting pretty incredible pretty quickly. It's a fantastic tool for taking a bunch of information and creating a deck around that information. But they all have their pros and cons. I'd say Gamma is, a pretty first class tool for being able to edit that content that you create.
Hmm.
Whereas platforms like GenSpark and Manus, great at taking a lot of information, extracting information, putting it in a deck. Then your options to kind of edit that deck so that it comes out looking like something that you actually want to present are a little bit more limited. And then you have more bespoke solutions for the commercial real estate industry. There's a platform called Henry AI. You might have bumped into those folks before, and it's a little bit more of the same, but they kind of take your custom tailored templates and build their solution around your templates so that things come out looking much more consistent than when you're using one of these kind of off the shelf AI tools. So, 2.5 years ago, I'd say there was almost nothing. Now there's so many that it's hard to tell you which one is absolutely the best. But Gamma is the one that I typically use most often when I'm using AI to create some sort of marketing deliverable.
Got it. It's interesting. We were just uh, doing this internally, and Adrian, who leads our product team, was showcasing a tool within Claude to build out um, decks. And I think it's interesting how now you can layer on these tools within something like a Claude that can do all sorts of different things and specialize in those things and leverage them, which is also, I
Yeah.
think, an interesting path as well. Interesting that you didn't mention Claude, because I think that, that's an area where I feel like in the last, few weeks, it's like OpenAI's dead. Everything's Claude all the time, 24 hours a day, it seems.
Yeah. Claude is taking the internet by storm right now. I don't know if they hired a viral marketing agency, but it's almost like the indie hacker movement, or the growth hacker movement from the 2010s come back to life. All of a sudden everybody's, full bore Claude all the time. But that's kind of the thing, there's so many useful ways to use AI now, and there's so many shiny objects out there that, to me, you always have to test and experiment, because things are changing very rapidly. But it's always going to come back to, hey, what actually saves you time? And so now, yeah, Claude all of a sudden can produce decks. I also didn't mention ChatGPT. It can also
Yeah.
produce
Yeah.
decks. I personally, and I don't know a whole ton of people that, have been able to leverage them in a way that they're able to make something that looks, that they would feel, hey, this looks incredible. And it saved me a bunch of time doing it. It's certainly capable of doing it, but it all kind of comes back to your workflow. Hey, are you already using Claude for 90% of what you would be doing to create this deck anyway? Well, then, maybe it's worth it to be working with a platform that isn't going to ultimately provide a deliverable that looks quite as good as you want, but maybe you don't need it to look amazing. Maybe you're not going into pitch business. Maybe you're just going into your Monday morning meeting, that you have every single week, and you just need to visualize this information in a deck. So, there's tons of flashy objects out there, but it all comes back to, hey, is this something that is actually going to save you time or not? And if you're looking at it from a business perspective, not just an individual perspective, is this something that we can actually operationalize? It's like, hey, does our company have Claude? Are you working with a designer to have an AI powered designer? Do they know how to use Claude? Or, is it easier to operationalize something like, hey, this is Gamma. We have some great templates in Gamma. If you need to create a new slide, here's how you do that with AI, and they're off to the races, and you're just cranking out decks.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? I mean, it sounds like I've got a sense on where your head's at on this, but like your thoughts on, these open-ended tools that can do a lot of things versus a specialized tool like a Gamma versus a specialized tool specifically for CRE. do they all have a place? Is one going to win out? Do you drive when you're advising people in CRE, do you direct them towards certain things because they're easier or they're more specific? And what do you think is going to play out in that regard?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and the short answer is things are changing very quickly, and so who knows? I've always been a specialist in, hey, practical application. How can you put this to work now? For better or worse, I like to fancy myself as staying ahead of the curve of this stuff, but I've never fancied myself a futurist. It could all converge into one main tool, and maybe Claude becomes so good that everything else is extinct and you just don't need anything else. But I do think where we're at now, and this is typically what I go over in my presentations, is hey, things like Claude, things like ChatGPT, they're fantastic Swiss Army knives, but they might not be the best tool for the task that is at hand right now. Or they could have the capability of being a best in class tool, but you don't quite know how to use it that way right now. And you can't spend your entire week learning how to use AI tools every single week. And so, one example might be something like Claude Code. All of a sudden, it is very, I don't necessarily want to say simple, but it's very possible to have AI that is baked into your computer and has access to all those files and can seemingly, read those files and provide you information from those files in a way that it's not going to hallucinate frequently because it's, getting that information programmatically, and it's not ChatGPT that's kind of providing you some information and then it writes you a poem in the middle of it and then it makes a little bit of numbers up and just kind of rattles on and on and gives you ChatGPT gobbledygook. You could do that. You might not know how to do that right now. You might want to spend some time learning on how to do that. But if you need to do that right now, there's a platform, Notebook LM, that is purpose built for, hey, you provide sources in files and information to this custom AI assistant, and it's completely purpose built for being able to pull information and insights and stats and figures from those documents and those sources and report on them to you reliably and show you in those documents where it got that information and then synthesize that information in different ways. Maybe you want to create a slide deck, which I didn't mention Notebook LM a minute ago, but yeah, you can create slide decks in Notebook LM now too. Maybe you want to create a quick video. Maybe you just want to create an SOP on how to do something because you have a transcript from a training recording, that's in Notebook LM, and you want to be able to rely on that information. There's purpose-built tools, and then there's Swiss Army knife tools, but then there's also the fact that these Swiss Army knife tools are getting better and better, and they're layering in more functionality, but you might not be able to use that functionality as fast as you can just use one of these purpose-built tools. So Notebook LM is a great example. Another good example is Perplexity. I don't know if you've played around with Perplexity at all. It's not
Yeah.
quite as in vogue as it was maybe 6 or 8 months ago, but if you just want to use AI that is purpose built for searching the internet for information, giving you that information and always giving you the sources so that you can click in and read more about it and verify that information, it is a great purpose built tool for that. And so that doesn't mean I never use ChatGPT to look at the internet, doesn't mean I never use Claude. But if I have a question about something or I'm doing some really quick market research, Perplexity is kind of my front door to the internet now. I fire that open, I ask the question, and I know that what it gives me is going to be cited, from somewhere where it got that information, not on the internet, not logs and logs and logs of training data from when they tried to train it on the entire history of the internet. So I know it's kind of a rambly answer, but hopefully some of that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense, and I agree. And a lot of those are tools I enjoy using on a regular basis. Absolutely, and I'm a big fan of Notebook LM. Actually, I love it for internal training materials in particular, where I can throw it at you know all sorts of existing internal documentation we have, and I'm like, all right, teach a salesperson about this topic, or leverage internal materials to create a course for this, or a
Yeah.
video explanation of that, and it's super efficient for that kind of thing. Um,
Yeah, and even on Notebook LM, just kind of talking about the convergence of all these specialized tools versus multi-purpose tools. a very common use case with AI and brokerage, and I think commercial real estate in general, is learning to use deep research, learning how to search the internet, but kind of searching the internet on steroids to search through a bunch of information very, very quickly and find opportunities. Maybe it's expanding businesses, maybe it's properties that have somehow exhibited some type of distress signal. All of a sudden, you can use deep research in Notebook LM. And so instead of doing deep research, getting a bunch of information, and then dumping it into Notebook LM so you can learn more about it, you can literally just click the deep research button in Notebook LM, find mostly that same information. And instead of just, having to read through that giant report on, hey, here's a bunch of opportunities, you have kind of your own little custom AI assistant that is trained on all that information. And so if you're in a hurry, you can create a podcast about, hey, here's the top 10 businesses that look like they're expanding. You can listen to it on the way to your next tour and get in the loop and get some ideas on who you might want to reach out to.
Yeah. Awesome. So you've now had, experience consulting for firms of different kinds and different sizes, and stages. Where do you see success and where don't you? So for instance, are the large firms, you know, investing more in AI and benefiting from it? Are the smaller firms, using this as an opportunity to get a leg up? Where do you see more success in the sphere of AI within, let's talk about brokerage firms at the start.
Yeah, I think, let me think about how to phrase this for a second. The common denominator between groups, regardless of size, that seem like they're starting to have some success are groups that are kind of creating a culture of AI curiosity. I think there are a lot of groups out there that look at AI, and this is probably more specific to the regional groups than the larger groups, but they kind of look at AI as a line item on the budget. Like, hey, if we want to compete, we got to roll out an AI tool, and we got to give people to access. We got to give people access to it, and that's going to cost money. So try not to make it cost too much money, but get AI in the hands of everybody, and that's great. I think that's good for what it's worth, but that really is only a piece of the puzzle. AI is such a broad topic at this point. That's almost like saying, hey, we're going to have a technology budget line item, and we have to give people a technology tool and get them access to it, and that's going to solve this thing. And the reality is it doesn't. There's a wide array of reasons for that. Maybe it's, hey, we're bringing on this one particular tool, we're showing it to people, but we're not actually effectively training them on how to use it. Or it could be a combination of, hey, we're trying to train them on how to use it, but these brokers are paying us a lot of money in high splits to be at this firm, and we want them to rely on us for these particular resources, and so we don't necessarily want them to know all of these things that they might be able to do with some other AI tools, because we want to be doing that for them. And so there's almost kind of some shroud of secrecy around things that AI could potentially do that aren't things that you're providing them with this one specific tool. And the reality is, the way people access information is changing, and so they're probably going to find out, is, they, for better or worse, they're eventually going to get access to that information, that, hey, there's this other AI tool over here that could probably help me do this. And so I think the firms that I'm seeing have success with it, one, they're not just looking at it as if, hey, we got to get one AI subscription and roll that out to everybody. They're kind of going into it with an understanding that, hey, we might need to invest in multiple different types of tools. We might need to invest in different tools for specific people within this organization or specific processes. And beyond that, they're focusing a little bit less on, hey, let's take one specific thing and roll it out to everybody, and more so kind of illuminating people to what AI is capable of. And also having an understanding that, hey, in commercial real estate, and really in any industry, people that are high performers are always going to invest in themselves, to some extent. And so maybe it doesn't have to be that every single thing that someone is doing as a professional is provided through one specific tool that a company is rolling out to them. There, I think to some extent there needs to be a reckoning of understanding with that if you want to be a high performing professional, you're probably not just going to get everything that you could do with AI from ChatGPT. It's probably going to come from multiple places. So I know that was kind of a long answer as well, but I think the groups that are having more success than others are looking at it from a multifaceted approach of, there are different tools that are better for different jobs that will help position people to effectively do those jobs. And it's not just as simple as, hey, we're picking one thing and we're rolling it out to people. It's kind of creating a culture of curiosity with AI tools, exposing people to what it can do, but also letting people know that they should view these tools with scrutiny, and that not everything that these tools do for you is going to be magic. It's not a silver bullet, and so you're not just offloading everything you do to these AI tools because they're useful.
Sure. And it's interesting. It would seem to me that um, in some regards, creating this culture of curiosity might be at odds at times with some of the larger organizations, particularly, organizations that have a CISO, right? A chief information security officer who's
Right. Yeah.
concerned about what people can do and can't do. And it's like, well, yeah, I want to create let's say a culture of curiosity, but I also am afraid that if people are too curious or using too many tools, they're going to do stuff that they shouldn't do, and it's going to get us in trouble, legally, or create risk for the organization. And so, it feels to me like perhaps, smaller organizations could have an opportunity here and an advantage that they don't normally get.
Yeah, I think that is definitely true. And there's no right answer, because that's a very sticky question. How do we show people what's possible, but also make sure they're treating our data delicately, and they're abiding by what we want to do as a company. And full transparency, that is not necessarily my specialty. That is my partner Nadine's specialty. And I think one of the first things that she would say is, hey, create some sort of an AI governance policy, especially if you are a large organization and you view your data as something that is super proprietary and super valuable to you. It is possible to illuminate people to what AI can do, but also give them guardrails around what AI can do. And I think there's a difference between saying, hey, we're rolling out this one thing, only use this one thing, and that's it. And also, instead illuminating people to what's possible, but also saying, hey, this is how we use AI in this organization. If you are going to use something that is not something that this company has explicitly rolled out to you, here's what you do not do with that, if you work at this company. And here's what, you should be thinking about how to use these tools that we are providing to you. And I was actually doing a podcast with Nadine at one point, and she provided a stat. I can't remember exactly where it was from, but everyone looks at these AI governance policies as, hey, that's something that's boring and that's going to make people not want to use AI. But the reality is, it gets people more excited about using this new technology because they understand what they can and can't do. It's enumerated for them. And so they're not scared of, oh, well, what if I use this tool and it does X? What if I use this tool and the wrong thing happens? That's kind of been laid out for them. And so now they have some guardrails to work within as they're experimenting with these tools. And if part of that governance policy is, hey, for now, we do just want you using the stuff that we roll out to you. I think that that's fine too. Every group is going to have different parameters that they're working within, and different definitions of what does success look like when we're working with these AI tools. But I think if that's the case, a pretty heavy investment in training needs to be made on, hey, this is the one thing that we're doing, but this is exactly how we think you should be using it. And this is what success looks like using this tool, not just, hey, we gave you this one thing. you have AI now. Good luck. Have fun.
Totally, totally. And it's funny. I can see why having these guardrails actually can help you, and it's something we've been thinking about internally at CompStak as well. I tried out Claude Cowork, which is one of the latest and greatest tools, and decided to have it, reorganize some files for me on my desktop. And then I opened up the folders, and a bunch of the folders were empty, and the files were nowhere to be found. And I'm like, oh my God, did I just delete a ton of data? Turns out I hadn't. It was there. It was in the
Yeah.
wrong folders, and Claude Cowork kind of screwed up, and it was able to fix it. But that's a real thing, and it's like
Oh
how
yeah.
much you put power in the hands of your people, and that power can be challenging, particularly if things go wrong. Um,
Yeah. And I think to your point, that is why, to some extent, some smaller, or even regional groups might have a leg up, not necessarily because they have no risk. There is just, maybe fewer parameters that they need to work within. Maybe it's just a smaller team, and it's easier to control what's happening and it's easier to keep everybody on the same page. Whereas the larger of an organization you get, we're talking about Claude Cowork right now. How many commercial real estate organizations do you think, have really put significant research into Claude Cowork and, leveraging it within your organization is very difficult to keep up with this stuff, even just from an individual perspective. And so, if you're going to do it effectively, again, it kind of comes back to it is going to take more than, hey, just we picked one tool and we gave it out to everybody. It's going to take real resources if you want to continue investing into research and trying to stay ahead of this stuff.
Absolutely. So I want to pivot a little bit into data because in this podcast we always talk about data, and we're a data company, so we're obsessive about data. And I'm curious, you know, what are the best opportunities and tools you've seen specifically as it relates to working with data, and how have you advised clients to think about how to better leverage data using AI?
Yeah, I mean, so this might be a boring answer, but I think the way that I've really harped on, how to better leverage your data is a little less regarding how to leverage it with AI, but more so how to get your data in a place so that you might even be able to leverage it in AI. And I have a funny meme of a guy in my presentations that he's got a big frown and he's holding a sign saying, I can't automate my processes because I don't have any processes. I think the hardest part of working with data, mostly, for the smaller groups, is just operationalizing, getting all the data where it needs to be. And so that's AI could be a component of that. Maybe, hey, you have a really good project management platform in place. And so eventually it becomes really easy to say, hey, we have this kind of document going into our system. So now we're going to kick on AI to extract some information and then put it into this system. And then, AI can make mistakes sometimes. And so maybe instead of someone doing that manually by hand, now it's somebody's job to review or spot check that information and make sure you have quality data going into your system. But, as far as leveraging it, I think there's a lot of people in commercial real estate, combining different sorts of MCP servers or, giving some sort of limited access to their CRM so that they can look through and quickly, instead of tinkering around with a bunch of Salesforce filters, say, just show me everybody, that I haven't called in the last 30 days. Or, show me everybody that I've tagged as a hot prospect that I haven't talked to in the last 2 weeks, and quickly spin up ideas for, hey, who should I be reaching out to today? Who should I be, working with to make sure this continues to be a relevant relationship? I think that depending on this kind of goes back to, people have different ways of finding success with AI. There's different ways depending on what your job is or what your type of business is. But the harder part really is creating those systems to operationalize getting the information where it needs to go so that AI can even access it. Because I know you've said this before. If the answer is, hey, that AI, that data exists across a bunch of different scattered spreadsheets all over our shared drive, it's going to be pretty hard for AI to access that information on a regular basis. So that's typically where I advise people to start is, start with your processes first, start with systematizing and operationalizing, and then depending on what you want to do with AI, it's going to be much easier to do if that information all lives in the right place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the first step actually in many regards might be using AI to help you clean and normalize the data that you do have.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
to get it to a place where then you can start asking questions of it, because you can't ask questions off of crappy data, but
It's true.
you can work to clean up that data using AI though, and have it,
Hmm.
find columns that are a little different, but actually the same in two different spreadsheets, right? Things like that.
Yeah.
Um, where I think there's some real opportunity, and the CRM is an interesting one too. I think that I don't know your perspective on it, but I kind of feel like the days of fighting for and maintaining beautifully clean CRMs are numbered, right? Nobody likes doing it. No,
Hmm.
and nobody's going to be willing to do it in a world where you can just ask questions of everything that might be in that CRM, from the
Sure.
emails and the phone calls and the calendar invites from which it all started anyway, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if CRMs as we know it are really fundamentally changing.
Yeah, it's funny. That's a recurring tweet that I think I've tweeted, maybe every 8 months or so. Ever since Microsoft announced Microsoft Copilot, I did admittedly think that they were going to roll that out in a more meaningful way of AI being able to access your files and your emails, and extract all that information consistently. But it's a fair question. When you can just ask AI, hey, what are all of my lease renewals that are coming up that I should be aware of and start reaching out to people on? What are all the purchase and sale agreements that I have out for signature, but I haven't received signature on yet? Or who are all the people that I've done a deal with in the past year, but I haven't talked to in the last 6 months? When you can just use AI to access that information, what are you going to need a CRM for? But I think I'd be the first to admit it is difficult to foresee how long it's going to take for AI to truly get there. And even, something like Claude Code, again, all of a sudden you have AI baked right into your computer that in theory could answer those questions for you. But, it takes some finesse to get it there. And it takes some finesse to get it to access the right information. And what if it's missing something because you told it to look in one folder, but it's in another folder? And then you have, hey, how are we going to roll that out throughout an entire organization? That is going to take some time. So in the meantime, I do think there is a lot of value to a clean, diligently used CRM. But I do think that is one of the things that on a long enough timeline is probably on the chopping block due to these incredible AI tools and what they're going to be capable of.
Absolutely. So let's, you said you can't quite foresee when things are going to change or how things will change with CRMs, but let's try to paint the picture a bit for where we see things going. So, there's data now that, let's say theoretically, there's data all over your, computer network on your desktop. You use AI to find and get, consolidate all of that data into one place. Not to mention everything you can get from LLMs off the internet more broadly. Um, to what extent does data become more democratized, and does that fundamentally change the way this industry works? Or does it effectively just result in an evolution, but it's not all that different from where we are today?
Yeah, and truthfully, I'm a little more interested in your take on this matter than mine. I think it's a mix, right? That again, just the way that people access information is changing, and so that it's already starting to change commercial real estate. Even something as simple as, hey, someone is Googling trying to find some market stats. Previously you would have gotten a bunch of links to a bunch of brokerage websites to their market reports. You click over, you see their face, you see their name, you see that they worked so hard on this market report. All of a sudden, Google just takes a piece of that market report and your competitor's market report and just kind of serves it up to them on a silver platter, they might never even see you. And so that's already changing commercial real estate, because you got to work harder just to actively stay in front of your target clients, as opposed to just kind of hoping that they're going to find you. But conversely, AI is also making it easier to stay in front of your target demographic. It's making easier to, if nothing else, brainstorm social media content or help you create that social media content. But in terms of how it will change things long term, I do kind of always gravitate to the example of, hey, you're trying to pitch a new listing and you found a bunch of comp data, maybe on your own platform, maybe on a different platform, but a lot of brokers will actually call other brokers and ownership groups to verify that comp data. Maybe there's a certain level of distrust, or maybe there's some information missing, or maybe just because it's such a specific property, there really only are a handful of really useful comp data points. And it doesn't even always have to be comps, but just a couple very useful data points, and that's just not publicly accessible anywhere, and you got to call up the person who owns that property. And it happens to be, a 70-year-old woman who owns her own property and brokers her own deals. And she doesn't want to pick up the phone when anybody calls her, who's trying to collect that data. But they might pick up the phone, for a fellow broker, because there's some camaraderie there, and they want to be able to reach out to that broker when they need some information in the future. And so I think, this is just my gut instinct, I think there's always going to be some level of that in commercial real estate, that, data just is siloed and it's not all easily accessible at any given point in time. But I do think that the story about data in CRE is just changing, and you're seeing that at a much closer frame than I am. And so things are going to be different. I don't know exactly how, but I think some things will be
Yeah.
different, but I do think some things will also stay the same.
Yeah. Well, you make a really good point, and I hadn't really thought about it so much that way. Your point about these market reports just becoming data points once you went in ChatGPT versus people actually reading the report itself, and to be honest, I hadn't really thought a lot about that because, we put out a lot of content, for public consumption, and we do it as a means of building our brand, right? We could keep it all siloed, but we put out some of it and our analysis of it, through our real estate intelligence team. So people read our reports and get our analysis. At the same time, we purposely expose some of it online to drive traffic to us. But if we
Hmm.
were exposing this data only for people to see it, but not to really serve as a great marketing channel, do people still want to even do that anymore? Right.
Hmm.
You could see um, a backfiring, on this, where people become less inclined to share, want to hold more tight to the vest, because they don't get the same value of sharing maybe as they used to. But at the same time, it's all going to be shared anyway in some capacity. I don't know.
Yeah.
We struggle
Yeah.
with it every
It
day.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine where it's going. Yeah, I shouldn't say it's hard to imagine. It's hard to know which imagination is correct, but even something as simple as the content I produce. Not to diminish the value of the content I produce, but I have a newsletter that I put out every single month on, hey, here's some specific ways that you can use AI to do things with commercial real estate. And previously, if you had looked on ChatGPT and just said, "Hey, how can I use AI in commercial real estate?" It would give you some ideas, like, "Hey, write a property description. Hey, do this." But it would also say a bunch of things that just weren't true. Like, "Hey, you can use AI to whatever collect all the data in the universe and predict exactly where rental patterns are going." 2.5 years ago, the ChatGPT just wasn't going to help you do that at all. Now it's got a little better at analyzing data, but now that, I've produced a lot of content that is out there, it's on the internet and it's available. There are some other people in the space doing the same thing. All of a sudden, if you ask ChatGPT about that particular niche, you're actually going to start getting some useful information. And so just the ways that people access information is changing. And I don't want to be a rain cloud and ruin anybody's day over it. But if you're not aware of it, you can't do anything about it. And so, the world's changing, and you gotta bob and weave. And who knows? The marketing is always a changing force. That's actually something that kind of originally illuminated me to, wow, there's so many ways you could leverage technology in commercial real estate that people aren't doing. I was coming from a digital marketing background, and I would look for commercial real estate marketing tips and be like, why doesn't anybody have a blog on this? No one seems to have a blog on anything. It's just kind of behind. But marketing does evolve very quickly. And so, hey, maybe now, Google starts driving way less traffic to your website just via links. But maybe Google spins up the greatest digital advertising solution of all time, within Google Gemini, that enables you to drive way more traffic, and maybe it's a lot cheaper or a lot more effective. This stuff is always changing. And so knowing how it's changing is kind of the most important piece, so that there's not going to be a right answer to what you do in light of that change, but you're going to have to do something.
Absolutely. I think that might be a good stopping point for us here, because we don't want to drag out the podcast forever. But I think what we should do, if you're open to it, I think it could be fun to have you back to actually demo for the audience some more specific examples of some of these things, because I think that could be great. You threw out the
Yeah,
names of a bunch of interesting tools, and I think that a lot of people would love to see some of the use cases on how best to use it.
I think that'd be fantastic. I'd love to come on. Maybe we could even do it live in CRE AI Studio if you
That would
want
be
to.
awesome too. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and where CRE AI Studio exists?
Absolutely. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm mostly active on LinkedIn. Just look for Topher Stephenson, both of those spelt with a PH, and you should find me pretty quickly. On Twitter, well, it's called X now, but on X you can find me at Topher Now, spelled Tophernow. Had to think about the now for a second. And CRE AI Studio, most importantly, you can find that at creaistudio.com. And right now we're providing a 7-day free trial for anybody who wants to join. And we're releasing weekly step-by-step tutorials on sorry, we're producing weekly step-by-step tutorials on how to use specific AI tools to execute specific commercial real estate workflows. But we also do live sessions with Q&A. We provide different prompts that we use in our tutorials and our lessons. We provide automation templates in case you want to go out and use one of these automation platforms to automate AI to do some of this work for you. So if you want to see what it's all about and start using some of the prompts and watching some of the lessons, go to creaistudio.com, get the 7-day free trial, and look forward to seeing you in there.
Awesome. That sounds great, and I'll be in there digging into all these. So for everybody, thank you for joining, and please subscribe to the Not podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and anywhere else you find podcasts. You can look for us there, and maybe we'll be there too. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. And also, look us up on social media as well, at CompStak. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.